He was the strongest. That is how Bobby Heenan described one man. But it was not a gimmick. It was real. This was not just wrestling. These were killers. Bobby Heenan saw a bar fight once. What he watched that night changed how he thought about toughness forever. A man reached into another man's mouth with just 2 fingers. He broke the bottom teeth right off. Bobby said if he had not been there to see it himself, he would not believe it. The man who did this was calm. He was controlled. He used 2 fingers like a weapon. Bobby Heenan managed Andre the Giant. He worked with King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd. He saw the biggest, scariest men in wrestling history. But that night in the bar, he knew he had found something else. Something more dangerous than size, more dangerous than strength. He found a man who could turn violence into art. We are not talking about storyline villains here. We are not talking about characters who look mean on camera. These were legit tough guys. Guys who scared even Andre the Giant. And Bobby Heenan saw it all, up close. He spent 4 decades in professional wrestling. He started in the raw, brutal territory system of the American Wrestling Association. He moved to the big lights of the World Wrestling Federation. He ended his career in World Championship Wrestling. Everywhere he went, he kept his eyes open. He watched. He learned. He figured out who was really dangerous and who was just pretending. Bobby Heenan never released an official top 10 list. That is important to understand right from the start. There is no video of him counting down names. There is no written document with rankings. The idea of a numbered list is something fans and writers created later. They wanted it to be neat and organized, but Bobby did not think that way. He talked about toughness in stories. He mentioned names in interviews. He dropped hints over decades. And if you listen carefully to everything he said, a pattern starts to form. You start to see who he really respected, who he really feared. Heenan had strict rules for what made someone tough. It was not about how they looked. It was not about their muscles or their height. It was not even about how well they performed in the ring. Bobby Heenan cared about one thing only. Could this person hurt you for real? Not in a scripted match, not in a worked angle, but in a parking lot, in a bar, in a locker room when nobody was watching. That was the test. That was the only test that mattered. Bobby was famous for playing a coward on television. He ran away from fights. He hid behind his wrestlers. He begged for mercy. That was his character. But behind the scenes, he was the opposite of stupid. He knew exactly who could kill him if they wanted to. His survival depended on it. A manager who does not know who is really dangerous does not last long in the wrestling business, especially not in the territory days, especially not in the AWA. Bobby lasted decades because he understood power, real power, the kind that does not need a microphone or a camera. His number 1 was never in question. Bobby Heenan called one man the toughest he ever met in his entire life. Not the toughest wrestler, the toughest man. He made that distinction very clear. He broke the 4th wall to say it. In wrestling, you are supposed to protect the business. You are supposed to keep kayfabe alive. You do not admit that some guys are shoots and some guys are works. But Bobby broke that rule. He told the truth. And when a man like Bobby Heenan tells the truth about danger, you listen. There were 2 men in the world that Andre the Giant feared. Just 2. Out of everyone Andre ever met, only 2 made him nervous. Andre was 7 feet 4 inches tall. He weighed over 500 pounds. He was called the 8th wonder of the world. He was the biggest draw in wrestling history. People paid money just to see him stand in the ring. But even Andre knew there were limits. Even Andre understood that size does not win every fight. He feared 2 men. Bobby Heenan confirmed it. And that fact alone tells you everything you need to know about toughness. Before we start counting down, understand what this list represents. These were not the best workers. They were not the biggest stars. Some of them were famous. Some of them were not, but every single one of them earned respect in a way that matters. They earned it through pain, through survival, through a willingness to cross lines that normal people will not cross. Bobby Heenan watched wrestling evolve from a legitimate sport into pure entertainment. He saw the transition happen. He saw shooters become actors. He saw tough guys become characters. But he never forgot where the business came from. He never forgot the men who built it with their fists and their blood. The culture around toughness in wrestling was strange. It was almost religious. Wrestlers worshiped guys who could really fight. They told stories about bar fights and locker room beatings like they were legends from ancient times. And maybe that made sense. When your entire career is based on pretending to hurt people, you need to know who can really do it. You need a hierarchy. You need to know your place. Bobby Heenan understood that hierarchy better than almost anyone. He lived in it. He managed it. And now, through his words, we can see it too. But here is the thing nobody wants to admit. That culture was not always good. Being feared is not the same as being respected. Some of these men were heroes. Some of them were bullies. Some of them hurt people who did not deserve it. The line between enforcing order and causing chaos was thin. Bobby Heenan talked about these men with admiration. But if you listen closely, you can hear something else too. You can hear caution. You can hear the understanding that danger cuts both ways. A man who will fight for you will also fight against you. A man who breaks teeth in in a bar might break yours someday. So here it is. 10 men Bobby Heenan knew were dangerous. Not a fan-made list, not a gimmick. This is built from decades of interviews and stories. This is built from the words of the man who managed Andre the Giant and lived to talk about it. If you think we missed someone, drop it in the comments. But understand that these names come from Bobby himself. They come from his criteria, his rules, his fear. Number 10, Ray Stevens. Bobby Heenan trusted very few people in wrestling. It was not that kind of business. Everybody was trying to get ahead. Everybody had an angle, but Ray Stevens was different. He was a territory veteran. He worked the AWA during its hardest years. He was known as the Crippler. That nickname was not for show. He earned it by being legitimately tough and willing to back up his skills anywhere. Stevens was a high flyer. He did moves that were ahead of his time, but that does not mean he was soft. It meant he was smart enough to work a crowd and tough enough to handle himself when the show was over. Bobby respected Stevens because he was reliable. In the territory system, reliability meant everything. You traveled together, you shared locker rooms, you depended on each other to make money and stay safe. Stevens was the kind of guy who would not stab you in the back. He would not politic. He would not try to take your spot. But if someone else tried to take his spot, Stevens would shut it down. He had the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can handle yourself. He did not need to brag. He did not need to start fights. But if a fight came to him, he finished it. Stevens worked closely with Nick Bockwinkel. Bockwinkel was one of Bobby Heenan's most important clients. That connection meant Bobby saw Stevens up close for years. He saw how Stevens carried himself. He saw how other wrestlers treated him. There was a respect there that you cannot fake. When Ray Stevens walked into a room, people paid attention. Not because he demanded it, but because he had proven himself over and over again in an era where proof was everything. The AWA was a brutal testing ground. It was not like the WWF where everything was controlled and scripted down to the second. The AWA still had shooters. It still had guys who came from amateur wrestling backgrounds. It still had guys who would stretch you if you disrespected them. Stretching meant using real holds to hurt you. It meant making you submit for real, not for the cameras. Ray Stevens survived in that world. He thrived in it. That alone puts him on this list. Number 9, the original Sheik. This man was terrifying for different reasons. His toughness was not about muscles or technique, it was psychological. The original Sheik made people believe he was insane, and maybe he was not pretending. He worked a gimmick that involved extreme violence. He used fire, he used sharp objects, he bled constantly, but the scary part was that he seemed to enjoy it. He seemed to blur the line between what was real and what was performance. That made him unpredictable, and unpredictable people are the most dangerous kind. Bobby Heenan talked about the Sheik as a legendary figure. The territory system was full of stories about him. He would show up to a town and destroy somebody, then he would leave. Nobody knew what he would do next. That kind of chaos was powerful. It kept people off balance. In wrestling, if people do not know what to expect from you, they leave you alone. They give you space. They do not test you. The Sheik understood that. He built his entire career on it. But there was a cost to that approach. The Sheik existed outside the normal structure of wrestling. He was not someone you could work with long term. He was not someone you could build a promotion around. He was a force of nature. You pointed him at something and watched him destroy it. Then you got out of the way. Bobby Heenan was smart enough to recognize that kind of power. He was also smart enough to stay far away from it. The Sheik represented a kind of toughness that was almost extinct by the time Bobby retired. Modern wrestling does not have room for guys who refuse to follow the script. It does not have room for guys who bring real danger into the building. But in the territories, that was normal. That was expected. And the Sheik was the king of it. He scared people in a way that went beyond physical strength. He scared them because he did not seem to care about consequences. A man who does not care about consequences cannot be controlled. And a man who cannot be controlled is a problem. Number 8, Stan Hansen. If you worked in Japan during the 70s and 80s, you knew about Stan Hansen. He was one of the most feared foreign wrestlers in the history of Japanese wrestling. His style was stiff. That means he hit people for real. He did not pull his punches. He did not protect his opponents the way you were supposed to. His lariat finisher was famous for knocking people out, not for the cameras, for real. Wrestlers would wake up after a match with Hansen and not remember what happened. That is not acting. That is a concussion. Hansen was unpredictable. He had bad eyesight. He wore thick glasses outside the ring, but inside the ring, he could not see clearly. That made his movements erratic. He would swing wildly. He would hit people he was not supposed to hit, and because he was so strong, every mistake was dangerous. Wrestling with Stan Hansen was like wrestling with a bull. You knew it was going to hurt. You just did not know how badly. Bobby Heenan respected Hansen because Hansen had a reputation that crossed oceans. In Japan, they loved him because he worked so hard. He gave everything in every match. American wrestlers feared him because he did not care about protecting protecting them. That combination of respect and fear is rare. Most guys are one or the other. Hansen was both. He was beloved by fans and terrifying to his peers. The interesting thing about Hansen is that he was not trying to be mean. He was not a bully. He was just intense. He believed in making wrestling look real, and the best way to make it look real is to make it hurt. That philosophy worked for him. He became one of the biggest stars in the world, but it came at a cost. His opponents paid that cost with their bodies. And Bobby Heenan, watching from the sidelines, understood that Hansen was not someone you wanted to cross. Not because he would go after you outside the ring, but because inside the ring he might accidentally kill you. Number 7. Verne Gagne. Bobby Heenan worked for Verne Gagne for years. Gagne owned the AWA. He built it from nothing. He ran it with an iron fist, and that fist was backed up by legitimate skill. Gagne was an Olympic-level amateur wrestler. He trained under some of the toughest coaches in the world. He knew how to hook. Hooking meant using real submission holds that could break bones or tear ligaments. In the territory days, knowing how to hook was essential. It kept order. It made sure nobody got out of line. Gagne did not need to yell. He did not need to threaten. His reputation did the work for him. Everybody knew that if you disrespected Verne Gagne, he could take you to the mat and hurt you. That knowledge created a culture of discipline in the AWA. Wrestlers showed up on time. They did their jobs. They did not complain, because if they did, Gagne would remind them why he was in charge. Bobby Heenan respected Gagne because his authority was earned. It was not based on money or politics. It was based on the fact that Gagne could back up every word he said. In wrestling, that is rare. Most promoters are businessmen. They hire tough guys to enforce their rules, but Gagne did not need to hire anyone. He was the enforcer, he was the boss, and the muscle at the same time. The AWA was built on Gagne's vision of what wrestling should be. It should be rooted in legitimate skill. It should reward athletes who had real training. It should not be a circus. Gagne hated gimmicks. He hated flashy characters. He wanted wrestlers who could wrestle, and he made sure his promotion reflected that. Bobby Heenan thrived in that environment because he understood the rules. He respected the hierarchy, and at the top of that hierarchy was Verne Gagne, a man who could break you if he wanted to, but chose to build you instead. Number 6. The Crusher. The Crusher was an AWA legend. He represented blue-collar toughness. He was not fancy. He was not technical. He just absorbed punishment and kept moving forward. That kind of durability is its own form of toughness. It is not about how hard you can hit. It is about how much you can take and still get up. The Crusher built a career on that simple idea. Fans loved him because he looked like them. He looked like a guy who worked in a factory. He looked like a guy you would see at a bar, but he could take a beating that would put most men in the hospital. Bobby Heenan saw the Crusher in his prime. He watched him work night after night in brutal physical matches. The Crusher never complained. He never asked for time off. He just showed up and did the job. That consistency built trust. It built respect. In the wrestling business, the guys who last the longest are not always the most talented. They are the ones who show up, the ones who tough it out. The Crusher was the king of toughing it out. His toughness was cultural. It came from a generation that did not believe in quitting. You worked until you could not work anymore. You hurt until you could not hurt anymore. Then you kept going. The Crusher embodied that mentality. He turned it into a character. But it was not really a character. It was who he was. Bobby Heenan understood the difference. He knew when someone was playing a role and when someone was just being themselves. The Crusher was himself, and himself was tough as nails. The partnership between Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher defined the AWA for years. They were a tag team, but they were also a philosophy. They were proof that you did not need to be the biggest or the fastest or the smartest. You just needed to be willing to endure. That willingness is what Bobby Heenan saw in the Crusher. It is what made him include the Crusher in his mental list of guys who were legitimately hard. Not hard in a flashy way, hard in a way that mattered when everything else was stripped away. Number 5. Dick the Bruiser. If the Crusher represented durability, Dick the Bruiser represented chaos. He was legitimately unhinged. He got into real bar fights. He hurt people outside the ring. His gimmick was that he was a violent brawler. But the scary part was that it was not really a gimmick. He was a violent brawler. He just happened to make money doing it in front of cameras. Bobby Heenan started his career in the AWA. That meant he was around Dick the Bruiser constantly. He saw how other wrestlers reacted to him. They were careful. They did not joke around with him the way they did with other guys. They gave him space. That kind of deference is earned. Dick the Bruiser earned it by being willing to cross lines. He did not care care about the rules. He did not care about consequences. He just did what he wanted, and what he wanted was usually violent. The Bruiser blurred the line between kayfabe and reality. Kayfabe is the illusion that wrestling is real. Most wrestlers protect kayfabe by staying in character, but the Bruiser did not need to stay in character because his character was real. He was mean on camera and mean off camera. That made him unpredictable. And as we have already established, unpredictable people are dangerous. Bobby Heenan talked about the Bruiser as a defining legend of the chaotic territory era. The territories were wild. There were no corporate rules. There was no HR department. If someone had a problem with you, they handled it themselves, usually with their fists. The Bruiser thrived in that environment. He was not just surviving, he was ruling. He was one of the top guys in the Midwest for decades because nobody wanted to challenge him. Nobody wanted to find out what would happen if they did. But here's the thing about Dick the Bruiser. His toughness came with a cost. He was hard to work with. He was unpredictable. Promoters loved him because he drew money. Wrestlers hated him because he was dangerous. Bobby Heenan recognized that duality. He respected the Bruiser's toughness, but he also understood that toughness without control is just violence. And violence for its own sake does not build anything. It just destroys. Number 4, Billy Robinson. Now we are getting into a different category of toughness. Billy Robinson was not a brawler. He was not a tough guy who got lucky. He was a trained killer. He spent 8 years training at the Snake Pit under Billy Riley. The Snake Pit was a legendary wrestling school in England. It specialized in catch wrestling. Catch wrestling is one of the most brutal and effective forms of grappling ever created. It focuses on submissions, on pain, on making your opponent quit or get injured. There is no middle ground. Robinson was a premier shoot wrestler. That means he could wrestle for real, not perform, not entertain, actually wrestle. If you put him in a fight with no rules, he would destroy you. He proved that over and over again in his career. He worked in Japan where they respected technical skill. He worked in America where they respected toughness. He excelled in both places because his skills were undeniable. Bobby Heenan worked directly with Billy Robinson during a tour in Japan in 1984. He saw Robinson up close. He watched him train, he watched him work, and he understood that Robinson operated on a different level than most wrestlers. Most guys learned a few holds and some psychology. Robinson learned how to hurt people in dozens of different ways. He knew pressure points. He knew joint locks. He knew how to make a man scream without leaving a mark. Later in his life, Robinson trained MMA fighters. That tells you everything you need to know about his legitimacy. MMA fighters do not train with fake tough guys. They train with people who can teach them real skills. Robinson could teach those skills because he lived them. He spent his entire life perfecting the art of combat. Bobby Heenan recognized that perfection, he respected it, and he knew that Billy Robinson was not someone you ever wanted to face in a real fight. The interesting thing about Robinson is that he was not mean. He was not a bully. He was a craftsman. He approached wrestling the way a surgeon approaches medicine, with precision, with knowledge, with respect for the craft. But do not mistake his professionalism for weakness. Billy Robinson could kill you with his bare hands if he wanted to. He just chose not to. That choice is what separated him from the brawlers and the bullies. He had control, and control combined with skill is the most dangerous thing in the world. Number 3, Danny Hodge. If Billy Robinson was a craftsman, Danny Hodge was a machine. He was an Olympic silver medalist in wrestling. He was a semi-successful boxer. He had grip strength that became legendary. There are stories about him crushing objects with his bare hands, about him bending coins, about him cracking walnuts with his fingers. Those stories sound fake, but they are not. Danny Hodge had freakish physical strength combined with world-class technical skill. In the wrestling business, Hodge was known for being willing to stretch people. If you disrespected him, he would hurt you. Not in front of cameras, not in a match, in the locker room, in private. He would take you down and apply a hold until you tapped or until something broke. That reputation kept people in line. Nobody tested Danny Hodge. Nobody wanted to find out if the stories were true. They just assumed they were and acted accordingly. Bobby Heenan respected Hodge because his toughness was measurable. It was not based on stories or rumors. It was based on actual athletic achievement. Hodge competed at the highest levels of legitimate combat sports. He won medals, he won titles, he proved himself against the best in the world. When you have that kind of resume, you do not need to convince anyone you are tough. They already know. The thing about Hodge is that his skills were wasted in professional wrestling. He was too good. He was too legitimate. Professional wrestling is about entertainment. It is about making people believe something fake is real. But Hodge did not need to make anyone believe anything. He was real, and that made him almost too dangerous to use. Promoters were scared that he would hurt someone by accident, or that he would hurt someone on purpose if they made made him angry. Bobby Heenan saw that danger. He understood that Hodge was in a category by himself, not just among wrestlers, among athletes in general. Danny Hodge was one of the toughest human beings to ever step into a wrestling ring, and the fact that most people do not know his name today shows how much the business has changed. In the territory days, everyone knew Danny Hodge. Everyone feared him. Now he is a footnote, but Bobby Heenan did not forget. He never forgot the men who could really hurt you. Number 2, Harley Race. We are now at the top 2, the only 2 men Andre the Giant feared. Harley Race was one of them. Race was an 8-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion. That means he held the most important title in wrestling during its most important era. He did not get that title because he was the best actor. He got it because he was the toughest man available. The NWA champion had to travel to different territories. He had to defend the title against local heroes. He had to make those heroes look good but still win. That job required respect, and respect in the territory system was built on the knowledge that the champion could hurt you if you tried to double-cross him. Race survived polio as a child. He survived cancer as an adult. He survived a near-fatal car crash that should have ended his career. His body was broken multiple times, and every time he came back. That kind of resilience is superhuman. It is not just physical, it is mental, it is spiritual. Harley Race refused to quit. He refused to accept that anything could stop him, and that refusal made him terrifying. Bobby Heenan and Harley Race were contemporaries in the AWA and NWA. They knew each other for decades. Bobby saw how other wrestlers treated Race. They gave him respect, not the fake respect you give to a boss because you have to. The real respect you give to someone who has proven they are better than you. Race commanded that respect through his presence. He did not need to yell. He did not need to threaten. Everyone just knew. The fact that Andre the Giant feared Harley Race is remarkable. Andre was massive. He was famous. He was protected by the entire industry because he was so valuable. But Andre knew that if Harley Race wanted to hurt him, size would not matter. Race would find a way. Race always found a way. That is what made him great. That is what made him feared. Bobby Heenan witnessed that fear firsthand. He managed Andre. He saw Andre's reactions to different people, and Andre only reacted to 2 men with genuine caution. Harley Race was one of them. Race represented old-school toughness. He came from an era where wrestling was closer to a real sport than entertainment. He carried that mentality his entire life. Even when wrestling became cartoonish in the 80s and 90s, Race never changed. He stayed hard, he stayed legitimate, and Bobby Heenan respected that consistency. In a business full of phonies and con artists, Harley Race was the real thing. He was tough when tough meant something, and he stayed tough even when it stopped mattering to most people. But let us be honest about what that toughness required. Race lived a brutal life. His body was destroyed. He was in constant pain. He could barely walk by the end. The price of being that tough was giving up a normal existence. Race sacrificed his health, his comfort, and his peace for a reputation. Was it worth it? Bobby Heenan seemed to think so. But watching Race struggle in his later years, you have to wonder. Toughness is admirable, but when it costs you everything, maybe it stops being toughness and becomes something else, something sadder. Number 1, Haku. Also known as Mung, the toughest man Bobby Heenan ever met in his entire life. Not just the toughest wrestler, the toughest man. Bobby was careful about that distinction. He wanted everyone to understand that Haku was in a category that transcended professional wrestling. Haku was dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with performing or entertaining. He was just dangerous. The bar fight story is what seals it. Bobby Heenan watched Haku get into a fight. The other man was being aggressive. He was pushing, he was escalating. Haku stayed calm. Then in one smooth motion, Haku reached into the man's mouth with 2 fingers, his index finger and his trigger finger, and he broke off the man's bottom teeth, just snapped them right off. The man collapsed. The fight was over. Haku walked away. Bobby said if he had not seen it himself, he would not believe it. That is important. Bobby Heenan managed giants. He managed monsters. He saw scripted violence every single day for 40 years. But that moment in the bar was different. That was real violence, real control, real power, and it terrified him. In a good way, in the way that makes you respect someone so much you never want to cross them. Haku was trained in sumo. That gave him a base of legitimate combat skill, but his reputation was not built in sumo rings. It was built in bars and locker rooms. There are dozens of stories about Haku, about him fighting multiple men at once and winning, about him being attacked and barely reacting, about him putting people in the hospital without breaking a sweat. Some of those stories are exaggerated, some of them are not, but the fact that the stories exist interest at all tells you something. People were terrified of Haku. The crazy thing is that Bobby Heenan also described Haku as a class man, as someone with a good heart who just wanted to work and feed his family. Haku was not a bully. He was not starting fights for fun. He was defending himself. He was protecting his reputation. In the wrestling business, your reputation is everything. If people think they can push you around, they will. Haku made sure nobody ever thought they could push him around, and he did it so effectively that even Andre the Giant was scared of him. Andre the Giant feared two men, Harley Race and Haku. That fact alone should be enough to convince you. But let us dig deeper. Andre was 7 feet 4 inches tall. He weighed over 500 pounds. He was beloved by fans. He was protected by promoters. He was the most famous wrestler in the world. He had every advantage. But advantages do not matter when someone is willing to hurt you for real. Haku was willing. Andre knew it, and so Andre stayed out of his way. There is another story about Haku. In 1987, there was a backstage altercation with Jesse Barr, also known as Jimmy Jack Funk. The details are murky, but the result is not. Barr ended up needing a glass eye. A glass eye. That is not a wrestling injury. That is not a bump gone wrong. That is someone destroying another person's face. Whether Haku did it on purpose or whether it was an accident, the fact remains. Haku was involved in an incident that left a man permanently disfigured. That kind of damage does not happen unless you are extraordinarily dangerous. Bobby Heenan managed Haku at various points. He worked with him closely, he traveled with him, and every single day Bobby knew he was in the presence of someone who could kill him without much effort. That knowledge changed how Bobby approached his job. He treated Haku with respect. He never pushed him. He never played the kind of games he played with other wrestlers, because with Haku, games could get you killed. Other wrestlers confirmed Bobby's assessment. Arn Anderson, a respected veteran, created a 3-tier system for toughness. At the bottom were tough men. In the middle were wrestler tough men. At the top, in a category all by himself, was Mung. Anderson said that Mung was different, that he was legitimately dangerous in a way that no one else was. When multiple people from different eras all say the same thing, you start to believe it. But here is what nobody talks about. Haku's toughness was a prison. He could never relax. He always had to be on guard. Because if you are known as the toughest man in wrestling, everyone wants to test you. Everyone wants to see if the stories are true. Everyone wants to be the guy who beat Mung. So Haku had to be ready to fight at all times. He had to maintain his reputation through violence. That is exhausting. That is lonely. And that is the cost of being feared. Bobby Heenan admired Haku, but he also understood the burden. Being the toughest means you never get to stop being tough. You never get to let your guard down. You never get to just be a person. You are always the guy who broke someone's teeth. You are always the guy Andre was scared of. That identity follows you forever. And maybe at the end of your life, you look back and wonder if it was worth it. If being feared was better than being loved. If respect through violence is really respect at all. So there it is. 10 men Bobby Heenan knew were dangerous. 10 men who ruled locker rooms through real toughness, not scripted toughness. 10 men who made their living in a business built on lies but maintained their reputations through truth. From Ray Stevens at number 10 to Haku at number 1, these were the guys who scared even the scariest men in wrestling. But let us be clear about what this list represents. It is not just a ranking of tough guys. It is a snapshot of a culture. A culture that valued violence, that rewarded intimidation, that made heroes out of men who hurt people. Bobby Heenan participated in that culture. He celebrated it. He built his career on it. And we, by watching this video, are celebrating it too. Is that a good thing? Maybe not. Maybe we should think harder about what it means to glorify toughness. Maybe we should ask whether being feared is really something to aspire to. These men sacrificed their bodies and their peace for a reputation. They lived in constant pain. They died young. They left behind stories of violence that we now consume as entertainment. The territory system is gone. The culture that created these men is gone. Wrestling today is safer, it is more controlled, it is less real, and that is probably good because the realness came at a cost. The toughness came at a cost. Every one of these men paid that cost. And when you add it all up, you have to wonder if it was worth it. Bobby Heenan died in 2017. He lived a long life. He saw wrestling change from a rough, dangerous business into a corporate entertainment machine. He saw the tough guys disappear. He saw them replaced with athletes and performers. And maybe he missed the old days. Maybe he thought the business was better when it was more real. Or maybe in his final years, he understood that real violence is not something to celebrate. That toughness is not the highest virtue. That being feared is not the same as being respected. We will never know what Bobby really thought. We just have his words, his stories, his memories of the toughest men he ever met. And those memories give us a window into a world that does not exist anymore. A world where your survival depended depended on knowing who could hurt you, a world where respect was earned through pain, a world where 2 fingers in a man's mouth could break his teeth and end a fight before it started. That world is gone, but the stories remain, and as long as we keep telling them, those 10 men will live forever. Not as heroes, not as villains, but as something more complicated. As men who were dangerous, men who were respected, men who were feared, men who Bobby Heenan, the greatest manager in wrestling history, knew you did not mess with. So there it is. Not a fan-made list, not a gimmick, but the 10 men Bobby Heenan knew were dangerous. If you think we missed a name, drop it in the comments, like the video if you learned something, and subscribe because we have got more legends to unpack, more stories to tell, more forgotten history to resurrect. The territory days are over, but their legacy lives on in stories, in memories, and in lists like this one.